Captain Jake Murphy was 3 days into a milk run to Proxima Station when his ship's communication system started screaming at him like a toddler who discovered the word no. He was hauling frozen protein, bars, the kind that tasted like cardboard had mated with sadness, and he'd been looking forward to absolutely nothing going wrong for once in his miserable life. "Computer, what's the problem now?" Jake asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "Distress signal detected. Origin, subsector 7, 7 Alpha. Distance, 4 light hours." Jake groaned. 4 light hours meant turning around, which meant being late, which meant his boss would dock his pay again. Is it an actual distress signal, or another one of those automated buoys advertising timeshare opportunities? Analyzing. Signal appears genuine. Species identifier reads as PIP. PIP? Jake sat up straighter. He'd never heard of them, which in the grand catalog of thousands of known species was saying something. Well, that's new. Fine. Plot an intercept course. Let's see what fresh nightmare awaits. 6 hours later, Jake's scanner finally picked up the source of the distress call, and he had to triple-check his instruments because they were telling him something completely insane. According to his sensors, there was a ship out there. A very, very small ship. Like, could fit in a shoebox small. "Computer, run diagnostics. I think our sensors are broken. Sensors operating within normal parameters. Vessel dimensions confirmed. 8.3 centimeters in length." Jake stared at his screen. "You're telling me someone built a spaceship the size of a hamster and actually flew it into deep space? That's either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever heard." He established a communication link, half expecting a prank. Instead, his view screen flickered to life, and there stood what could only be described as a tiny, incredibly well-dressed mouse person, wearing what appeared to be formal diplomatic robes. The creature was maybe 3 inches tall, with large, earnest eyes and whiskers that twitched nervously. "Human vessel. This is Ambassador Quillen of the PIP Sovereignty. Thank you for responding to our distress call. We are in desperate need of assistance." Jake blinked, then blinked again. "You're serious. You're actually serious right now." "Gravely serious, Captain. Our homeworld is under threat of forced evacuation by a 3-system alliance. They claim our presence is, and I quote, an aesthetic inconvenience to the region." An aesthetic inconvenience, Jake repeated slowly. "They want to evict an entire species because you're too small and it bothers them?" "Precisely. The Vorn, Kretsch, and Molvar have formed a coalition demanding we vacate our homeworld within 30 standard days. We've occupied this planet for over 4,000 years, but apparently our stature offends their sensibilities." Jake rubbed his temples. This was the kind of ridiculous, galactic politics he'd specifically become a cargo hauler to avoid. "Okay, let me get this straight. 3 entire star systems have teamed up to bully you because you're tiny. And what, they want your planet? Is it made of platinum or something?" "Nothing so valuable. They simply believe the space could be better utilized by larger, more dignified species." Ambassador Quillen's whiskers drooped. "We've appealed to the Galactic Council, but they've classified our dispute as a regional matter and declined to intervene." "Of course they did," Jake muttered. The Galactic Council's favorite hobby was avoiding anything resembling actual work. "So what exactly do you want me to do about it?" "I'm a cargo hauler, not a diplomat. We're asking any species who will listen for aid. You're the first to respond." Quillen looked up at him with those impossibly large eyes. "Please, Captain Murphy, we have nowhere else to turn." Jake felt something twist in his chest. He'd always been a sucker for lost causes, which his ex-wife had mentioned approximately 6,000 times during their divorce proceedings. His therapist called it a hero complex. Jake called it bad decision-making skills. He sighed deeply, knowing he was about to do something phenomenally stupid. "All right, I'll help. But I'm going to need to make a call first." "To whom?" "Earth Command. Because if we're doing this, we're doing it properly." Jake pulled up his communication array, already dreading the conversation. "Fair warning, though, Ambassador. When humans get involved in other people's problems, things tend to get complicated." "Complicated how?" Jake smiled grimly. "You'll see." Jake spent 20 minutes on hold listening to Earth Command's truly atrocious muzak, someone's ill-advised remix of Beethoven's Fifth with synthetic drums before a tired-looking daft to first 4. Communications officer appeared on his screen. "Earth Command, Lieutenant Davis speaking. How can I help you today?" "Yeah. Hi. I need to report a potential humanitarian crisis involving a species called the PIP. They're being forcibly evicted from their homeworld by a three-system alliance, and I may have accidentally promised to help them. Lieutenant Davis blinked slowly. You promised to help them? In my defense, they're very small and very polite, and I'm apparently incapable of learning from my mistakes. Sir, this is a diplomatic matter. You should really contact the Galactic Council. They already did. Council told them to pound sand. Look, can you just connect me to someone with actual authority? I've got a cargo hold full of protein bars that are going to expire, and I'd like to resolve this before I'm personally bankrupt. Davis sighed, the sigh of someone who knew they were about to make their problem someone else's problem. Stand by. 3 minutes later, Admiral Patricia Hawks appeared on screen, and Jake immediately knew he'd made a terrible mistake. Hawks had the look of a woman who'd joined the military, for excitement and adventure, only to spend the last decade managing supply chains and attending sensitivity training seminars. Her eyes had the dangerous gleam of a predator who'd just spotted prey after a very long, very boring fast. Captain Murphy, Lieutenant Davis tells me you found us a war. I wouldn't say I found you a war, exactly. More like I stumbled into a really aggressive property dispute. Tell me everything. Jake explained the situation, including the part where 3 entire star systems had decided that tiny mouse people were ruining their neighborhood. He expected skepticism. He expected bureaucracy. He expected to be told this wasn't Earth's problem. Instead, Admiral Hawks leaned forward, and her smile could have cut steel. 3 systems, against one species of, what did you say they were? 3 inches tall? Give or take. And they want to kick these Pip off their own planet because they're aesthetically inconvenient. That's the summary. Yes. Hawks was quiet for a moment, and Jake could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes. Captain Murphy, how would you say Earth's reputation is in the galactic community these days? Confusing? People can't decide if we're dangerous or just weird. Exactly. We've been too peaceful lately. The Great Peace Accords were wonderful for galactic stability, absolutely terrible for maintaining our image as a species you don't mess with. Do you know what I've been doing for the past 6 months, Captain? Paperwork, forms, requisition orders, meetings about having meetings. I haven't had a decent military operation since the Beetlejuice pirates decided to retire and open a restaurant. She stood up, and Jake recognized that posture. That was the posture of someone who just made a decision that was going to make a lot of people very unhappy. The Pip are a sovereign species being threatened with forced relocation by a hostile alliance. That sounds to me like they need freedom. Admiral, when you say freedom, you're using that word in the normal way, right? Not in the historical human context, where freedom involves multiple carrier groups. Captain Murphy, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you want to help these Pip people or not? Jake thought about Ambassador Quillen's drooping whiskers. He thought about an entire civilization of 3-inch-tall people being kicked off their own planet because they were too small. He thought about his therapist telling him he needed to engage more with the community, though this probably wasn't what she'd meant. Yes, I want to help them. Excellent. Then consider yourself temporarily conscripted into Earth's 3rd Fleet as a civilian advisor. We're going to liberate the Pip homeworld. Liberate. Right. Admiral, just to be clear, are we talking about actual military action here? Hawks smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd been waiting years for this exact moment. Captain Murphy, I'm talking about aggressive diplomatic negotiations backed by overwhelming force. We're going to park so many warships in their space that they'll see Earth's flag when they close their eyes. We're going to file so many formal complaints that their bureaucrats weep. And if they're very unlucky, we might actually have to shoot at them. This feels like an overreaction. This feels like justice. Besides, it's been a slow quarter. The fleet needs the exercise. She started typing rapidly. I'm mobilizing the 3rd Fleet now. Rendezvous coordinates will be transmitted to your ship. How many Pip are we protecting? I didn't ask. Ambassador Quillen, how many of you are there? Quillen's tiny voice came through the comm. Approximately 2.4 billion on our homeworld. 2.4 billion people, Hawks repeated. And 3 star systems think they can just push them around because of their size. Not on my watch. Murphy, get to those. Coordinates. Earth command out. The screen went dark, and Jake sat in stunned silence. He'd called for help, and somehow started an interstellar incident. Ambassador Quillen appeared on his secondary screen, looking equally stunned. Captain Murphy? Was that woman serious? Unfortunately, yes. Congratulations, Ambassador. You just became humanity's new favorite cause. Jake started plotting a course. I'd apologize, but honestly, those three systems picked the wrong tiny species to mess with. The three-system alliance had seemed like a good idea at the time, at least according to Supreme Commander Rothak of the Vorn Empire. The Vorn were 7-foot-tall reptilian warriors who'd built their entire culture around the concept of strength, honor, and looking intimidating at diplomatic functions. Rothak had scales like armor plating and a voice that could make junior officers wet themselves at 50 paces. Explain to me again why we haven't simply invaded the Pip homeworld and been done with it, Rothak growled at his communication screen. On the other end, High Bureaucrat Thesic of the Kretch Collective chittered nervously. The Kretch were insectoids who'd evolved from something like a mantis and a filing cabinet. Thesic's compound eyes reflected the light from his 17 monitors, each displaying a different form. Commander Rothak, we've discussed this. There are protocols, procedures. We must file the proper invasion permits with the Galactic Council, submit environmental impact assessments, and complete Forms 77 Alpha through 77 Zeta before any military action can be considered legally binding. That's 43 forms. 47. Actually, you forgot the addendums. Rothak made a sound like a chainsaw gargling gravel. This is why the Vorn prefer to handle things directly. Yes, and that's why you've been sanctioned by the Council 18 times, Thesic replied primly. The Kretch way ensures everything is documented, justified, and legally defensible. A third voice joined the conversation, this one sounding like wind chimes having an existential crisis. But is any of this real? Are we truly here, or are we merely the dream of some greater consciousness? Is the concept of invasion itself not just a construct of our limited perception? Not now, philosopher Mas Bendu, Rothak and Thesic said simultaneously. The Mulvar were gelatinous beings who existed in large communal blobs and spent most of their time debating whether anything actually existed. Bendu's translucent form rippled with what might have been amusement. I'm simply suggesting that perhaps the Pip are not physically small, but rather we are metaphysically large. The problem isn't their size, but our perception of size itself. The problem is, they're squatting on prime real estate in a strategically important sector, Rothak snapped. That system sits at the intersection of 3 trade routes. With them gone, we can develop the planet properly, build infrastructure, establish military bases. After filing the proper commercial development permits, Thesic interjected. After whatever bureaucratic nonsense you require, yes. The point is, the Pip have had 4,000 years to make something of themselves, and what have they accomplished? Tiny cities, miniature agriculture. Everything about them is small. Rothak said the word, like it physically pained him. The galaxy has no room for weakness. But what is weakness? Bendu mused. Is it not stronger to persist in smallness than to compensate with size? Perhaps we are the ones who are weak for requiring so much space. I will literally invade your system next if you don't stop, Rothak threatened. Would you, though? Or would you merely contemplate invasion? And if you contemplate it, does the invasion exist in potential form, which is technically focus? Thesic clicked his mandibles together sharply. We have reports that a human vessel responded to the Pip distress call. A cargo ship, civilian flagged. Should we be concerned? Rothak laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. One human cargo hauler? The humans are traders and explorers. They avoid military conflicts whenever possible. This changes nothing. Perhaps the human is not real, Bendu offered. Perhaps he's a metaphor for enough. Rothak's roar made both screens flicker. We proceed as planned. The Pip have 26 days remaining to evacuate. If they don't leave peacefully, the 3 fleets will converge and remove them by force. One lost cargo hauler won't change that. Thesic pulled up another form on his screen. I'll file the intent to enforce evacuation notice. Should take 3 to 5 business days to process. Fine. I'll begin positioning the Vorn battle fleet. Bendu, please position your ships somewhere useful and try not to debate whether the ships actually exist while you're doing it. All movement is an illusion, Bendu replied serenely. But yes, I'll position our vessels in the agreed-upon coordinates. Or will I? Is intention the same as action? If I intend to move the ships. Rothak terminated the connection before he could say something that would require filing an apology form with the Kretch. He pulled up tactical displays of the Pip system. It was a pleasant little world. Perfect for military staging. The Pip themselves were irrelevant. A statistical footnote. Just another small species that history would forget. His tactical officer approached, scales pale with concern. Commander, we're receiving updated intelligence from our scouts. It appears Earth Command is mobilizing their third fleet. For what purpose? Unknown, sir, but their trajectory puts them on course for the PIP system. Rothak waved a clawed hand dismissively. Probably a training exercise. The humans are always running drills. They got one good victory against the Beetlejuice pirates and think they're military geniuses now. Sir, the third fleet includes 4 carrier groups, 18 destroyers, and their flagship, the Indomitable. So, we have the combined might of 3 star systems. Even if the humans were foolish enough to intervene, which they won't, we vastly outnumber them. The tactical officer looked like he wanted to say something else but thought better of it. Yes, Commander. Rothak turned back to his displays, already imagining the PIP homeworld transformed into a proper military installation. The humans would see reason. Everyone always saw reason when faced with the Vorn battle fleet. He had no idea he was about to learn a very important lesson about humanity. They were absolutely terrible at seeing reason, especially when they decided something was cute and needed protecting. Admiral Hawks arrived in the PIP system with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for action movie villains. The third fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, 4 carrier groups arranged in a pattern that spelled out hello when viewed from the planet's surface. It was petty, unnecessary, and exactly the kind of psychological warfare Hawks specialized in. Jake watched from his cargo ship, which now felt laughably small next to Earth's flagship, the Indomitable. The ship was 2 kilometers of weaponized diplomacy, bristling with enough firepower to glass a small moon and painted in a shade of gray that said, "We're here to have a conversation, and you're going to listen." Captain Murphy, welcome to the party. Hawk's face appeared on his screen, looking far too pleased with herself. How's our tiny friend doing? Ambassador Quillen stood on Jake's console, staring out the viewport at the assembled fleet with an expression of pure terror. Captain Murphy, this seems excessive. Yeah, that's kind of humanity's thing, Jake admitted. We don't really do subtle. Hawks overheard and laughed. Subtle is for people who aren't sure they're right. We're very sure, Murphy. Bring the ambassador aboard the Indomitable. I want to coordinate our diplomatic strategy. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself in the Indomitable's command center, which looked like someone had given a theater designer unlimited budget and a vendetta against minimalism. Holographic displays showed the positions of every ship in the system, including the 3-system alliance fleet that was currently scrambling to respond to Earth's arrival. Ambassador Quillen stood on the tactical table, trying very hard not to look overwhelmed. Admiral Hawks, I must express my gratitude, but also my concern. We asked for help, not a full military invasion force. Ambassador, this isn't an invasion force. This is a diplomatic mission. Hawks gestured to the displays. We're simply here to have a conversation with your neighbors about their unreasonable eviction notice. The warships are just for emphasis. That's a lot of emphasis. We're an emphatic people. Hawks pulled up a communication channel. Now, let's introduce ourselves. Open a channel to the 3-system alliance leadership. All frequencies. The screens flickered to show Supreme Commander Rothak, High Bureaucrat Thesic, and Philosopher Mas Bendu, all looking various degrees of confused and annoyed. This is Admiral Patricia Hawks of Earth Command. We're here regarding the forced relocation of the PIP species. We'd like to discuss alternative solutions. Rothak's scales rippled with barely contained anger. This is not your concern, human. This is a regional matter between established systems. The PIP situation does not involve Earth. See? That's where you're wrong. We're making it our concern. Call it a hobby. We like protecting smaller species from aggressive neighbors. Hawks smiled pleasantly. Now, we can handle this diplomatically, or we can handle this the other way. Your choice. Are you threatening us? Rothak leaned forward. The combined fleet of 3-star systems outnumbers your forces 3-1. Quality over quantity, Commander. Also, have you checked your targeting systems lately? There was a pause. Rothak barked orders off-screen. A moment later, his expression shifted from confident to confused. What have you done? Oh, nothing much. We just sent a little software update to all ships in the system. Totally harmless. It just requires anyone who wants to fire weapons to first submit a proper invasion permit, complete with environmental impact assessments, and Form 7-7 Alpha through 7-7 Zeta. Hawks winked at Thesic. I believe that's the Kretsch standard, isn't it? Thesic's mandibles clicked in what might have been admiration or horror. You weaponized bureaucracy. We learned from the best. The update is read-only, encrypted, and embedded in your navigation systems. You try to bypass it, your ships go dead in space. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your fleets, cancel the eviction order, and recognize PIP's sovereignty. Or you can try to fight us, in which case you'll spend the next 6 hours filling out forms while we make ourselves comfortable. Rothak looked like he might have an aneurysm. This is outrageous! This is an act of war! No, this is aggressive diplomacy. War is what happens if you ignore us. Hawks pulled up another display. Speaking of which, we've also taken the liberty of broadcasting your invasion plans to the Galactic Council, along with evidence that the PIP have occupied their world for 4,000 years, which technically makes this attempted genocide under Council law. That carries some pretty serious sanctions. You're bluffing, Rothak growled. Am I? Let me check. Hawks tapped her console. Nope. Council just received the full briefing. 17 different news networks, too. You're trending on the Galactic Net, Commander. Hashtag Big Bullies. Hashtag Pip Lives Matter. Hashtag Maybe Don't Mess with Tiny Mouse. People you absolute. Monsters. It's not great for your image. While Rothak sputtered, Hawks continued. But wait, there's more. We've also deployed ground forces. Ground forces? Ambassador Quillen squeaked. Admiral, you didn't mention ground forces. Surprise. Lieutenant Morrison, report. A new face appeared on screen, a woman built like a tank wearing full combat armor. Ma'am, Operation Tiny Shield is proceeding smoothly. We've established defensive positions around all major PIP cities. Show them. The display switched to ground footage, and Jake had to suppress a laugh. Human soldiers, each one massive compared to the PIP, were carefully constructing defensive barriers, using what appeared to be furniture dollhouse scaled to PIP proportions. They worked with the intense focus of professionals, building walls, setting up shield generators, and occasionally stopping to help tiny PIP civilians cross streets. We've also distributed emergency supplies, Morrison continued. Food, medical, equipment, and approximately 40,000 tiny umbrellas because it looked like it might rain. Tiny umbrellas, Rothak repeated flatly. They're very cute, Morrison said without a hint of irony. Any force that wants to reach the PIP will have to go through us first. And sir, with all due respect, I really hope you try. My team has been doing training exercises for 6 months. We're bored, Philosopher Mas Bendu rippled thoughtfully. Perhaps this is all an elaborate metaphor for the nature of protection itself. Are the humans truly defending the PIP? Or are they defending the idea of, not now, Bendu? Rothak and Thesic shouted together. Hawks leaned back in her chair. So, gentlemen, and whatever Bendu is, what's it going to be? Do we talk this out like civilized species? Or do we see who's better at filling out paperwork while dodging railgun fire? The three leaders looked at each other. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Thesic's mandibles clicked. I'll need to file a formal withdrawal request. It's a very long form. You have 12 hours, Hawks said cheerfully. Clock's ticking. Supreme Commander Rothak stared at the human fleet for exactly 6 hours before his pride overrode his common sense. In that time, High Bureaucrat Thesic had filed 17 different forms attempting to find a legal loophole. Philosopher Mas Bendu had written a 3,000-word essay on whether combat was merely aggressive dialogue, and Rothak had consumed enough stimulants to kill a smaller species. This is ridiculous, Rothak finally snarled. We are warriors. The Vorn do not back down from threats, especially not from a species that spent half their history fighting each other over invisible lines on dirt. Prepare the fleet for combat. We'll show these humans what real military power looks like. His tactical officer looked nervous. Sir, about the targeting system lockout. Override it, manually if you have to. The Vorn battle fleet will not be stopped by paperwork. What Rothak didn't know, what none of the Alliance leaders knew, was that Admiral Hawks had been counting on exactly this response. She'd spent 3 decades studying military psychology, and she knew one universal truth. Proud warriors always chose violence over humiliation. Admiral, the Vorn fleet is moving into attack position, reported Commander Chen from the Indomitable's tactical station. Their destroyers are attempting to bypass the targeting lockout. Hawks smiled. Let them try. How long until they realize? Realizing now, ma'am. On the Vorn flagship, Rothak watched his weapons officer frantically typing override codes, while their targeting computers cheerfully informed them that they needed to submit Form 77B, request for authorization to discharge weapons in occupied space, along with supporting documentation including but not limited to tactical necessity statements, collateral damage assessments, and a 500-word essay on why violence was the only remaining option. "This is insane," Rothak roared. "Just shoot them." "I'm trying, sir. The system won't accept manual overrides. It says our password has expired and we need to reset it using an email we don't have access to." "What email?" "Email protected, sir." Rothak's roar could be heard through the hull plating. Meanwhile, the Kretch fleet was experiencing their own special nightmare. High Bureaucrat Thesic had decided that if the humans wanted to play bureaucratic games, the Kretch would simply out-bureaucrat them. They'd spent the last 4 hours preparing a counter-document, a masterpiece of legal language that would expose every flaw in Earth's diplomatic approach. The document was 47,000 pages long. They transmitted it to the Indomitable with smug satisfaction. Admiral Hawks received it, glanced at the file size, and smiled. "Commander Chen, send them our response." "Ma'am?" "The proper procedures for warfare document. All 600,000 pages." "Admiral, that document doesn't actually exist. We made it up as a threat." "Then make it exist. Copy every military regulation we have, every treaty Earth has ever signed, every instruction manual for every weapon system, and every recipe from the fleet cafeteria. Send it all. If they want paperwork, let's give them paperwork." 30 minutes later, the Kretch fleet's communication systems began overheating. 600,000 pages of documentation was flooding their servers, forcing every ship to dedicate processing power to just receiving the file. Their tactical computers slowed to a crawl. Their weapons systems became unresponsive. Entire vessels went dark as they tried to process what was essentially a digital denial-of-service attack disguised as bureaucratic compliance. "This is cheating," Thesic chittered into the void, his 17 monitors now showing nothing but loading bars. "This is efficiency," Hawks replied cheerfully. "We just streamlined your entire decision-making process down to a simple choice: stop or crash." But the Molvar presented a unique challenge. Philosopher Mas Bendu and the collective consciousness of their fleet didn't operate on logic or pride. They operated on philosophy, which meant they could justify anything if given enough time to debate it. "We must consider," Bendu announced to his fleet, "whether engaging in combat would be an affirmation of existence or a denial of it. If we fire upon the humans, we acknowledge their reality. But if we acknowledge their reality, do we not also acknowledge the validity of their claims?" The Molvar fleet hung motionless in space, debating. Lieutenant Brick Morrison, watching this unfold from the surface of the Pip homeworld, had a different idea. "Admiral, permission to try something unconventional?" "Granted. I like unconventional." Morrison grinned and opened a channel directly to the Molvar fleet. "Philosopher Mas Bendu, I have a question for you. If consciousness creates reality, and you're currently conscious of the password 123, does that password exist within your ship's systems?" There was a long pause. "That's actually a fascinating philosophical proposition. If observation creates reality, then by being aware of the password, we potentially try logging into your weapon systems with it." Another pause. Then, from somewhere in the Molvar fleet, a very surprised voice. "It worked." "How did it work?" Morrison's grin widened. "Finally won. The police tell for minted generations, and the first min to money 16 where. The Cordon News and the Molvar fleet, while you were debating whether your ships existed. My team bearded your vessels and changed all your passwords. We used password 123 because we figured you'd spend so long debating security protocols that you'd never actually implement any. We also updated your navigation software, reorganized your file systems, and installed cat videos on your entertainment servers. You're welcome. You infiltrated our entire fleet. You left the airlocks unlocked. You were too, busy arguing about whether locked doors were an illusion of security to actually lock anything." Morrison checked her tactical pad. "Oh, and we may have also routed your communications through our systems, which means every philosophical debate you've had for the past 6 hours has been broadcast to the Galactic net. You're very popular with college students right now. Lots of memes." Bendu's form rippled with something that might have been embarrassment. "This is unexpected. Yeah, we get that a lot." Back on the Indomitable, Admiral Hawks was receiving reports from all fronts. The Vorn fleet was dead in space, unable to fire, and unwilling to retreat. The Kretch fleet had essentially crashed themselves trying to process paperwork. and the Molvar fleet had been philosophically outmaneuvered by a squad of Marines with basic IT training. Ambassador Quillen, still standing on the tactical table, looked up at Hawks with an expression somewhere between awe and horror. "Admiral, you've neutralized 3 entire fleets without firing a single shot." "Best kind of victory," Hawks replied. "Nobody dies. We make our point, and we get to feel smug about it afterward." Now comes the fun part. She opened a channel to all 3 Alliance leaders simultaneously. Rothak looked furious. Thesic looked exhausted. Bendu looked contemplative. "Gentlemen, I believe we've reached what you might call a decisive moment. Your fleets are currently unable to fight, unable to retreat without admitting defeat, and unable to save face. So let me offer you a solution that lets everyone walk away with dignity intact." "What kind of solution?" Rothak growled. "You're going to surrender, but we're going to call it something else. We'll call it a mutual understanding, a regional stability pact, a recognition of sovereign boundaries. Pick whatever phrase helps you sleep at night." Hawks pulled up a document on screen. This is the PIP Protection Treaty. It recognizes PIP sovereignty over their homeworld in perpetuity. It establishes trade agreements that benefit all parties. And most importantly, it includes a clause stating that any future aggression toward the PIP will be met with immediate human intervention. "You're forcing us to sign a protection treaty for a species of 3-inch mice," Rothak said flatly. "I prefer to think of it as you're agreeing to not be terrible neighbors. Sign it, and we'll restore your systems, remove the software locks, and pretend this whole thing was just a big misunderstanding. Refuse, and you can explain to your governments why your entire fleet got beaten by paperwork and password resets." Thesic's mandibles clicked. "And if we sign, you'll remove the documents from our servers?" "Every last page. Plus, we'll throw in some cybersecurity upgrades. Clearly you need them." "What about our philosophical broadcasts?" Bendu asked. "Those memes are deeply embarrassing." "Those stay. The galaxy needs to see that someone can outthink the Molvar. It's good for our reputation." Hawks leaned forward. "Clock's ticking, folks. What's it going to be?" The 3 leaders looked at each other across their screens. Pride warred with practicality. Dignity fought with survival. And slowly, inevitably, reality set in. "I'll need the document in proper legal format," Thesic said quietly. "Already done. 6 copies, notarized, witnessed by neutral parties from the Galactic Council." "The Vorn agree," Rothak said, through gritted teeth. "Under protest." "Your protest is noted and completely ignored. Bendu?" The Molvar rippled. "Is signing a treaty not merely accepting the illusion of agreement? If we sign something that doesn't truly exist, Bendu, I swear I will broadcast your entire philosophical catalog to every comedy network in the galaxy." "We agree." "Excellent." Hawks clapped her hands together. "See? Diplomacy works. Commander Chen, restore their systems and send over the treaty. Ambassador Quillen, congratulations. You just became the most protected species in this sector." Quillen looked up at her, whiskers trembling. "Thank you, Admiral. Though I'm not entirely certain what just happened. We declared war on bureaucracy, basic IT security, and philosophical debate," Jake said from his position near the back of the command center. "And somehow we won. That's humanity for you," Hawks said cheerfully. "We don't fight fair. We don't fight clean. And we absolutely don't fight predictably. But we always fight for the underdog." She pulled up a display of the PIP homeworld, where tiny cities sparkled in the sunlight, completely unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. Besides, someone has to protect the cute ones. The signing ceremony took place aboard the Indomitable 3 days later, and it was perhaps the strangest diplomatic event in galactic history. Supreme Commander Rothak attended via hologram because he refused to physically board a human ship. High bureaucrat. Thesic brought 17 assistants and 43 backup copies of the treaty. Philosopher Mas Bendu spent 20 minutes debating whether the ceremony existed before finally agreeing to participate. Ambassador Quillen signed the treaty using a pen that was, from his perspective, roughly the size of a telephone pole. The humans had thoughtfully provided a stepping stool. This treaty recognizes the PIP's sovereignty as an independent state under the protection of Earth. Admiral Hawks read from the official document, which had been printed in font size 6, so the PIP could actually read it. Any aggression, harassment, or aesthetic complaints directed at the PIP will be considered an act of war against Earth. Are we clear? "Crystal," Rothak muttered. "Legally binding," Thesic confirmed. "Philosophically ambiguous but practically acceptable," Bendu added. "Perfect. Gentlemen, pleasure doing business with you. Don't let the airlock hit you on the way out." After the alliance, leaders disconnected, looking various degrees of humiliated, Ambassador Quillen approached Admiral Hawks. Well, approached her boot. Hawks knelt down to eye level. Admiral, I must ask, why did you do all this? Earth had nothing to gain from protecting us. We're too small to offer military aid. Our economy is insignificant on the galactic scale, and we can't even reach the top shelves in most buildings. Why risk a war for us? Hawks smiled, and for once it wasn't predatory or calculating. It was genuine. Ambassador, humanity has a long history of being told we don't matter. We're too aggressive, too emotional, too weird, too young as a spacefaring species. We know what it's like to be underestimated. And we have a rule. Nobody messes with species we think are cute. You're tiny, you're polite, and you wear little diplomatic robes. That's adorable. We're morally obligated to protect you. That's your entire justification? We're cute? Never underestimate humanity's willingness to fight over things we find adorable. We once had a war over a bucket. This is at least more justified than that. Hawks stood up. Besides, it was fun. I got to use actual military tactics for the first time in years. My crew got valuable experience in creative problem solving, and we sent a message to the galaxy. Don't mess with the small guys, because humans are watching. Captain Jake Murphy, who'd been observing from a respectful distance, finally spoke up. Admiral, what happens now? Do we just leave and hope nobody bothers the PIP again? Oh, absolutely not. We're establishing the PIP Protection Pact. Permanent monitoring station in orbit, regular patrol routes, and a dedicated response team. Anyone who even looks at the PIP funny is going to have a very bad day. Hawks pulled up a schedule. We're also opening trade negotiations. Quillen, what do your people produce? Primarily miniature electronics. Our size allows us to manufacture components at scales other species find difficult. Perfect. Earth has a massive consumer electronics industry. We'll work out an arrangement. You get economic protection, we get access to micro-manufacturing techniques. Everybody wins. Except the 3 systems that just got humiliated, Jake pointed out. They'll get over it. Or they won't, and we'll humiliate them again. Either way works for me. Hawks checked her console. Murphy, you're free to go. Your protein bars are probably expired by now anyway. Yeah, about that. I'm pretty sure my boss fired me when I didn't show up to Proxima Station, so I'm currently unemployed and possibly wanted for breach of contract. Hawks laughed. Tell you what, Earth Command is always looking for civilian advisors with experience in first contact situations. The pay is terrible, the hours are worse, but you get to say you help save an entire species from forced relocation. Interested? Jake looked at Ambassador Quillen, who gave him an encouraging nod despite being roughly the size of Jake's thumb. He thought about going back to hauling cargo that tasted like sadness. He thought about his therapist telling him to engage more with the community. He thought about how, for the first time in years, he'd actually done something that mattered. You know what? Sure. Why not? I've already accidentally started one interstellar incident. Might as well make it a career. Excellent. Welcome to Earth Command, Captain Murphy. Try not to adopt any more endangered species without filing the proper paperwork first. About that, Quillen interjected. Captain Murphy, on behalf of the PIP sovereignty, I wanted to ask if there's anything we can do to repay you. You responded to our distress call when nobody else would. You risked your career, possibly your life, to help complete strangers. What can we possibly give you? Jake thought about it. He thought about the last 3 days of chaos, bureaucratic warfare, and password resets. He thought about tiny mouse people in diplomatic robes trying to survive in a galaxy that thought they were too small to matter. You know what I could really use? Good coffee. I've been drinking ship recyc for 3 years and it tastes like motor oil. If your people could figure out how to make actually good coffee, we'd be even. Quillen's whiskers twitched with amusement. Captain Murphy, the PIP have been cultivating coffee beans for 2,000 years. Our size allows us to select and process individual beans with precision no large species can match. I'll have samples sent to your ship within the hour. Seriously. Seriously. Consider it our first export to Earth. The beginning of a beautiful friendship. And so it was that humanity's latest military adventure concluded not with epic space battles or dramatic last stands, but with a protection treaty written in tiny font, a humiliated 3-system alliance, and the promise of really good coffee. 3 months later, the PIP Protection Pact was fully operational. Earth maintained a permanent presence in the system, and the PIP homeworld became known as one of the safest places in the galaxy. mostly because nobody wanted to deal with the humans who'd turned bureaucracy into a weapon. Supreme Commander Rothak never spoke of the incident again, and mysteriously developed a passionate interest in small species rights. High Bureaucrat Thesic added human diplomatic techniques to the Kretsch educational curriculum, specifically in the What Not to Do section. Philosopher Mas Bendu wrote a best-selling book about the nature of defeat and became a surprisingly popular motivational speaker. And Captain Jake Murphy discovered that Pip coffee was, in fact, the best in the galaxy. He also discovered that once you saved one species, the galaxy started sending you other distress calls. Apparently, humanity had accidentally become the go-to response team for small species in danger. Admiral Hawks couldn't have been happier. She had a fleet, a mission, and an endless supply of situations where overwhelming force could be applied for humanitarian purposes. The galaxy learned an important lesson that day. Never underestimate humanity's capacity for creative violence in defense of things they found adorable. Because humans didn't just fight wars, they fought wars their own way, which usually involved equal parts brilliance, insanity, and a complete disregard for how things were supposed to be done. The microspecies had asked for help. Humanity had said sure, and declared war on bureaucracy, philosophy, and common sense. And somehow, against all odds and basic military logic, they'd won. Because that was humanity's real superpower. The absolute refusal to let size, odds, or sanity dictate what was possible. Somewhere in the Pip capital city, a statue was erected commemorating the day Earth came to their rescue. It was 3 inches tall, perfectly scaled to Pip proportions, and depicted Admiral Hawks kneeling down to shake Ambassador Quillen's tiny hand. The inscription read, "To our protectors, who proved that the biggest hearts often come from the most unexpected places." Jake kept a miniature copy on his desk, right next to his coffee maker.